Hello and welcome back to the third of the Premier League betting show, where myself and Brad Walker run through the upcoming weekend slate of Premier League fixtures and pick out our best bets for all 10 matches. Now, we're going to do this in half an hour. We've missed that target, gone over it both times so far. Brad, this is the week. We're going to keep it short and sharp. Hopefully, we've just got too much insight to give out, I guess. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, mate. We had a couple winners, I think we did last weekend too, but again, we're looking to improve on it this week. So fingers crossed, this is the week. I've gone a little bit less ambitious with my prices. I think I went a bit too wide last week, but try and play it safe this week. But yeah, fingers crossed we can get some wins.
You're unlucky with the Everton corners, though. Even though they got thumped, I think they got 5 exactly, wasn't it? You went over 5 at 3-1, so a little bit unlucky there.
I can't believe it, but I can believe it. It's just my luck. But
Yeah, bad beat. Yeah, bad beat central here. Well, I'm feeling good about this week's selection. So we're going to go straight in with the first game. Myself taking that one, Arsenal versus Brighton in the early kickoff. And this is a meeting of two sides with perfect records. Arsenal survived some hairy moments, it must be said, against Aston Villa before, in my opinion, the best substitute in the Premier League, Leandro Trossard, came on and came up with the goods once again for them. And Thomas Partey adding a second late on probably made that look a little bit more comfortable than it actually was. David Raya had to make an unbelievable reaction save from Ollie Watkins at 0-0. But you know, they got the job done. This is what Arsenal do so well, and nice for them to get that monkey off the back with Villa, a team that did the double over them in costly fashion last season. Brighton had to wait even later for their winner against Manchester United, João Pedro netting in injury time. That was a great win for them because that game was back and forth. I thought Brighton started really well. United came into it late on. They looked the likelier winner late on, but Brighton, they've got so much threat in attacking areas, and to be fair to them, keep going to the end. What a great start for Fabian Hersler at Brighton. A clear adjustment in their play and their style of play, which I've noticed. Traditionally, we would expect Brighton to dominate the ball against virtually any opponent. They had 55% possession in that game against Manchester United last season, just 44% possession here. So Hursley's not one to have possession for the sake of it. He obviously wants to have this Brighton team attacking a little bit quicker and sharper. And by God, they've got some good threats in attacking areas, haven't they? We've touched on in both weeks. Just looking really dangerous right across the board. Mitoma, Minter, Adingra, Welbeck's got 2 goals in 2 games, plays one of his former sides here, of course. It's hard to see them not fashioning more chances here, even if they do end up getting beat by Arsenal, who are strong favourites to progress. You can get 8-1 on a Brighton win here. I'm not sure I'd quite stretch to that, although I do think it's a big price. But I do fancy them to score here. Arsenal have kept 2 clean sheets in their first 2 games, but as I say, Wolves had chances against them, and so did Villa last week. So they've not looked impenetrable. And I think the way Brighton are attacking at the moment, I think they'll cause Arsenal problems. So the way I'm going to play this game, Brighton to score in the first half. I think Arsenal will get on top of them as the game goes. Arteta's shown himself to be a very good manager at in-game changes that get Arsenal on top and help them solve problems. But I think they will have problems by Brighton early in this game. Brighton to score in the first half is 2-1. That price is available right across the board with most bookies, and that's the way I'm playing the early kickoff. It's over to Brad for the first 3 p.m, and it's Nottingham Forest taking on a Wolves side who've had a terrible start, Brad.
They have, yeah. I'm going to start on Nottingham Forest first, Matt. They picked up their first win of the season last week in the Premier League, a 1-0 win at Southampton, very hard-earned win for them. Morgan Gibbs-White stepping up with the goal. I feel like he'll be crucial if they are to avoid relegation again this season. That leaves them, though, with 4 points from their first 6. They were unlucky not to beat Bournemouth in the opening weekend too. Antoine Semenyo, of course, coming up with a late equaliser, to deny Forest the full 3 points. But another win this weekend against, of course, Forest manager Nuno Espirito Santo's former club makes it a near-perfect start to their campaign. They did only win 5 of their home fixtures last season, which they will need to improve on if they are to enjoy a more comfortable season this time around, I think it's fair to say. But they're moving on to Wolves, as you said. They're in free fall at the moment. You know, they've lost 5 consecutive Premier League matches on the spin, with just 1 win in their last 12. Of course, we touched on it last week and a couple weeks ago that the departures of Max Kilman and Pedro Neto won't have helped. They can't keep hiding behind that and before questions start to be asked of the players and particularly of the manager, Gary O'Neill. They lost, of course, last week 6-2 to Chelsea. Though I do think the scoreline was slightly misleading. I think if you look at the XG tallies, Wolves actually had a higher expected goals than Chelsea did. I think Wolves came in, at 2.11 and Chelsea was at 1.65, and they still lost by 4 goals, which is remarkable, really. And I suppose it sums up their luck at the minute. They do have goals in their teams with Mateus Cunha and Wang Hee-chan, and they will be boosted as well by the forward Jurgen Strand-Larsen scoring his first goal for Wolves last week. But they do need to stop conceding goals and be more ruthless themselves if they are to end this losing streak that they're on at the minute. Forest's recent record against Wolves isn't actually very convincing at all. They've only won one of their last 11 meetings, when Wolves are actually unbeaten in their last 6 games at the City Ground. Could this be the perfect fixture, therefore, for Wolves to turn their form around? I'm not so sure, if I'm being completely honest. They've been very poor defensively, as I've touched on then. They've not kept a Premier League clean sheet since the 1-0 home win against Sheffield United in February. And if you're looking for their last clean sheet on the road, you have to go back even further. That was in January when they drew 0-0 at Brighton. You compare that with Forest, like I said, clean sheet at Southampton last week. Unlucky not to keep winning versus Bournemouth on the opening weekend, if not for the late equaliser there. And they only failed to score 4 times at home last season, Forest. I'm going to overlook their recent record against Wolves and back them to win here. They seem to be two sides going in opposite directions. Wolves, if they're not already in one, they're on the verge of a crisis and could be plunged even deeper with another loss this weekend. And Gary O'Neill, I'm sure, will certainly be feeling the pressure then. But yeah, I'm going to back in Forest to win this one. Matt comes in 11-10. Generally, I think there's plenty of value in that one for me. So yeah, that's where I'll be going for this game.
Yeah, a little bit surprised to see Forest odds against there. Might be a bit of late money for them there, but we will watch that market. That's Brad's pick anyway, Forest victory there. I'm going to take Brentford versus Southampton next. And Brentford, I think they'll be pleased with their start to the season, despite a 2-0 loss at Anfield last weekend against Liverpool. That was always going to be a difficult fixture, wasn't it? Arne Slot's first home game in charge of the Reds. And I think Thomas Frank would have been realistic about what they could achieve there. But still, as they always do, they set themselves up to take advantage of their rare chances when they could. They had a couple of chances from set pieces, and they kept things tight for a long period, kept themselves in the game. Liverpool ultimately having too much quality in the end. But I think prior to that, they beat Crystal Palace on the opening day 2-1. That was a well-fancied Crystal Palace side coming into the season, coming into that game. But they were worthy winners there. And yeah, I think all in all, you have to say it's been a good start for Brentford. Whereas Southampton, well, they played very well on the opening day, but for no reward, losing 1-0 to 10-man Newcastle. And Russell Martin took the positives out of that performance, as he well should have done. But unfortunately, they would have been targeting a home game with the aforementioned Nottingham Forest as a really good chance to get some points on the board. And they're big games for Southampton in this battle to stay in the Premier League. So he'll have been disappointed in the manner that his side lost that game, Martin. They were battered in reality. I know the scoreline might have suggested it was close, but Forest had 23 shots to Southampton's 5 in that one. And that was despite Saints having 66% of the ball. So we know how possession-based Russell Martin is. Ultimately, it was for no reward last week. Brentford are really good in this kind of fixture. Against the 3 promoted teams last year, they won by an aggregate scoreline of 8-1. So they're really efficient when it comes to beating these sides on their own turf. They have no Ivan Toney, as we all know, very much expected to leave the club in the coming days. But that's been no problem for them so far. They've gone with a front 3 in their first game against Palace and a front 2 last time out with Jorn Risa and Brian Mbeumo up top. And then they have the likes of Kevin Schade, Keane Lewis-Potter, Frank Onyeka to come into the game. So loads of forward options, lots of pace in that front line as well. And they're going to be a handful for most teams, I think. So it's Brian Mbeumo that I want to be here with in terms of a player prop. I think the Frenchman is such a potent threat in these kind of games. He scored 9 goals last season from an XG of 10.2, so it could have even outperformed that, but very reliable scorer alongside Visa. The reason I want to be with Mbeumo over Visa here in the anytime goal scorer market is purely because he has inherited penalty taking duties from Ivan Toney as well, so he has that extra string to his bow now. Southampton gave up nearly 3 goals worth of XG in chances last weekend. You could argue that Brentford are even more likely to exploit that than Forest, probably have a better ruthless streak. So I'd be amazed if Mbeumo doesn't get 1 or 2 clear-cut chances in this game. At 19-10, just shy of 2-1 to score any time, I think he's a must bet there. So that's my pick. Brian Mbeumo, anytime goal scorer against Southampton at 19-10. Brad, over to you for Everton versus Bournemouth. And Everton, another team in crisis early on.
Yeah, we spoke about Wolves just then, and Everton have had an equally abysmal start to the season, starting with a 3-0 loss to Brighton at home on the opening day, and then a 4-0 defeat to Spurs last weekend on the road. 7 goals conceded, 0 scored. I think that confirms the pre-season worries that many people had about Everton about where the goals will come from. under Sean Dyche. You can see the response of the Everton fans and how they feel at the minute. The video of them expressing their feelings, let's say, at their players at a train station in London last weekend circled online. I think Sean Dyche is actually the favourite manager to lose his job next in the Premier League, coming in at 6-1. I think it's fair to say they're in dire need of victory here. Bournemouth, meanwhile, they drew both of their matches so far 1-1. A last gasp equaliser, salvaged a point in Nottingham Forest, as I touched upon early on in the video. They thought they'd bagged another late goal this time around against Newcastle, what would have been a winner, which was cruelly and questionably denied due to VAR perceiving it as a handball. I think Les said there, the better. We won't go into that today, but they are continuing their positive form. Seen under Andoni Iraola last term, what was his first season in charge. They were very, very good against Newcastle for large spells, and I think they would have been encouraged by the way they've coped so far with the loss of Dominic Solanke, who of course scored 21 of their goals last season. He's gone to Tottenham. They've replaced him with striker Evan Eason from Porto. He didn't score in his debut against Newcastle, but he definitely showed positive signs and saw plenty of involvement across the 72 minutes that he did play down on the South Coast. And that leads me into my bet for this game. I mentioned Everton's terrible defensive record so far compared to last season. Well, they had a great defensive record, but it's not quite been the case so far in this campaign. They've conceded a combined 23 shots in their first two league matches, and the two strikers which started up against them in those two games, Danny Welbeck for Brighton and Heung-min Son for Spurs, managed 4 combined shots on target across those matches, and they scored 3 goals between them in the process. You couple that with what we saw from Evan Nielsen against Newcastle, where he had 2 shots on target himself on his debut. I'm going to back him to do the same here. Surprisingly, you can get him to have 1.5 plus shots on target at 5-2 generally. Whether he'll get off the mark and find the back of the net remains to be seen, but I'll certainly be backing him to be equally as involved against, like I said, a pretty leaky defence here, Matt. So that's where I'll be putting my money for this one.
Yeah, it does feel like a big price, that, especially the way Everton are going at the moment. I think they're badly missing Jared Branthwaite's presence at centre-half, who, of course, had a minor operation on his groin, and that's a big loss for Everton, this Everton side. The penultimate 3 p.m. kickoff is Leicester taking on Aston Villa. Leicester earned a very good point against Spurs in their opening clash, but they were somewhat fortunate to do so, as we discussed last week. They were only 1-0 down somehow at the interval, could have been 4 or 5 behind, and then responded well after the break to get a point. But as a result of that performance, it was hard to fancy them against Fulham last weekend, and they duly fell to defeat, lost 2-1. Goals from Emile Smith-Rowe and Alex Iwobi. But that game probably looked tighter than it was on the scoreline. If you actually look into the shots side of things, Fulham had 18 attempts to Leicester's 5, and Leicester's goal was a corner from Wout Faes, which originally wasn't given, but VAR intervened to give it, but they didn't create much at all, Leicester, there. And that was a more worrying performance, perhaps more the kind of performance we expected to see from them. So I think the Foxes, in 3 of the 4 halves they've played so far, have been bitterly disappointing, to be honest. Villa, meanwhile, as I've already touched on, fell to defeat at Arsenal, but it was a credible performance. They probably should have been 1-0 up. Ollie Watkins, I think he would love that chance again against David Raya. An unbelievable save, but you'd back him to score that 9 times out of 10, wouldn't you? And that could have been a very different game, because Villa gave as good as they got for long periods. And combining that with that good victory on the opening day at West Ham, I think Unai Emery will be pleased with how this season has started. I have concerns over Aston Villa once the European schedule starts, because we saw how much Brighton struggled with their first season in Europe last year, managing the schedule with a thin squad. I think Villa's squad is slightly stronger in terms of depth, but I still think it'll have an effect on their Premier League form. However, the European games haven't started yet, so I really do expect them to take care of Leicester. I think the 4-5 on offer for a Villa win, keeping it really simple, it's just a really fair price. I think they should be a little bit shorter than that. I think they'll have too much quality all over the park for Leicester. And I'm also going to play their shot line, which is the even money mark is around 15.5. Well, as I say, Fulham having 18 shots last week, I would say Villa are a more dangerous attacking output than Fulham. That said, they are away from home, but that doesn't seem to really affect Villa. With Emery, they have this counter-attacking style, lots of pace on the break, and I think they'll just, as I say, think they'll have too much here. So I'm going to back them to have over 15.5 shots, which is currently 5-4 with Sky Bet. It is odds on elsewhere, so that 5-4 might not last long, but 2 bets for me in that game. They're both backing Villa. The final 3 p.m. kickoff is Ipswich taking on Fulham. Brad, over to you for that one.
Yeah, Ipswich have finally got the Liverpool and Manchester City games out of the way, haven't they, Matt? I think it was a tough ask on their Premier League return. In some ways, I'm sure
Season
their
starts
season.
now.
Yeah, exactly what I was going to say. In some ways, their season does start now. It's certainly a more winnable fixture, I think it's fair to say, this weekend. They will have been disappointed, though, with their penalty shootout defeat to AFC Wimbledon in the Carabao Cup on Wednesday. I'm sure that wouldn't have been the ample preparation that they'd have been looking for heading into this one. But nevertheless, they'll be desperate to get some points on the board here to kickstart their season. Interestingly, they've never lost consecutive home matches since Kieran McKenna was appointed manager in 2021. Of course, they weren't in the Premier League for a large portion of that time. It's at a different level now with the level they're operating at. But at least they did manage to get their first Premier League goal of the season away at Manchester City last week. Sammy Smodic scoring on his first start and for the club since he joined them from Blackburn. If anything, he probably scored too early against Man City, because as soon as that happened, they put their foot down and scored 3 in the next 9 minutes. But yeah, nevertheless, his goals will be vital, you feel, if they are to stay in the Premier League for another season. Moving on to Fulham, I think they've been very impressive so far. They narrowly lost to Man United on the opening night at Old Trafford, a late Joshua Zirkzee goal, securing the full 3 points for the home side in that one, but they could have easily have left Old Trafford with a point to their name that day. And as you touched upon there, Matt, they secured a 2-1 home win over Leicester last week. They were very dominant in that one, and also beat Birmingham in the Carabao Cup in midweek. They travelled to Portman Road too with a fully fit squad to choose from. Lots of talk about Fulham heading into the season was how their midfield would cope with the loss of João Palhinha, of course, went to Bayern Munich. There were concerns particularly how they'd cope defensively. But one man who has caught the eye in that midfield in offensive quarters is Andreas Pereira. No Premier League player has created more chances than him so far this season. He's created 13 for Fulham across the opening 2 match days. He's been unlucky not to get a couple of assists to his name. I'm sure he'd be ruin the Fulham strikers for their poor finishing up top. But he comes in at 23-10 here to score or assist any time this weekend. I think there's plenty of value in that one for me based on what I've just said there, the way he's been playing this season. I think Ipswich, their expansive style, could leave opportunities on the counter-attack for Fulham and for Pereira to exploit any space which is left behind. Like I said, Ipswich, I'm sure, will be desperate to get at least a point, but I'm sure they're behind, perhaps getting 3 here, but the crowd will be up for it. Like I said, we both said in many ways their season starts now, and I do feel that could leave some space for Pereira to exploit this weekend. Like I said, he's been a bit unlucky going forward, but I'm going to back him to change that this weekend. So that is my bet here, Andreas Pereira to score or assist anytime, 23-10 generally across the board. That's where I'll be going in this one, Matt.
Nice, like that. I'll be keeping a keen eye on that one. Back to you, Brad, for the late kickoff, actually, which is West Ham, who got their first win under Julian Lopetegui last week, and their take on Manchester City. They'll be doing well to make it 2 in a row, I think, but we shall see. What are you thinking for this one?
Yeah, I think that might be the understatement of the century based on their record against City, which I'll go into in a minute. But like you said, they did pick up their first win under Lopetegui last week with a 2-0 win away from home at Crystal Palace. That's actually the first time they beat a London side in 3 matches too. I'm sure they'll be chuffed about that. He'll be wanting to improve their home form this season, though. Lopetegui, they've only won 2 of their last 10 at the London Stadium in the Premier League. Obviously, they lost on the opening day at home to Aston Villa 2-1, as you touched upon. As for City, for a side that's not at their best until after Christmas, supposedly, they already look like they're going to take some stopping. They beat Chelsea 2-0 on the opening weekend, and then a 4-1 home win to Ipswich last weekend. 2 wins, 6 goals. You can't really ask for much more than that. To make things interesting for us, and maybe even them, they were briefly 1-0 down, as I touched upon, to Ipswich before then going to score 3 times in 9 minutes to completely put that game to bed and to break Ipswich hearts. Quite a cruel fashion, really. And if that's not worrying enough for West Ham, they're also about to welcome Rodri and Foden back to the squad this weekend. There's a chance both of those 2 could feature after missing out last week. I don't think Rodri played against Chelsea either, so he'd be set for his first appearance of the season. And then you look at the record between these 2. It's hard to make a case for West Ham. I think it's very easy to say that. West Ham lost 14 of their last 17 games against City in the Premier League. They've not beaten them since a 2-1 win at the Etihad in September 2015. So coming up to 9 years, their last win against City in the Premier League, and their last home win in the Premier League dates back even further. 2-1. There was a 2-1 win at the old Bowling Grounds. They've never beaten City in the league since moving to the London Stadium. I think they might have beaten them on penalties in a cup in the last couple of years, but in the Premier League, it's been a pretty barren run for them against the citizens in the league. City, like I said, have also scored 2+ goals in 9 of those their last 10 matches, against West Ham, and they scored 3 or more goals in 4 of those games. You add to that City being the top scoring side in the league last season with 96 goals. Got a feeling they might win in style again here. And then you consider the form of Erling Haaland, who, of course, has 4 goals already across his first 2 matches in the league, a hat-trick against Ipswich last weekend. It doesn't really bode well for West Ham. So I'm going to be going here with Manchester City to score 2.5 plus goals. That comes in 6 to 5 generally across the board. I think there's plenty of value in that one based on what we've seen from City individually as a team, but also what we've seen from them against West Ham over the last decade or so.
Not good listening if you're a West Ham fan there, but hard to argue with the logic, I'm afraid. We move on to Sunday then. 3 games, starting with Newcastle versus Tottenham. I'm going to take this one, and I'm looking forward to this one. Newcastle have had a mixed start to the campaign, I think it's fair to say. They beat Southampton on opening day while they were far from their best. They could point to the fact that they had a red card early on to Fabian Schär, so that was a good victory, I suppose, but they weren't playing entirely well before that red card either, so a little bit unconvincing. And then that kind of carried on last weekend at Bournemouth, as Brad already touched on earlier in the video. The Cherries had a very controversial late winner ruled out. Looked a little bit harsh, to be honest, but there it is, a draw and a win to start the season. So they'd be fairly happy in terms of results, but they still look a little bit short in some areas for me, especially in defence. I wouldn't be surprised to see a little bit of business coming in on Tyneside before the window slams shut next week. Tottenham, meanwhile, they'll have been, as I said earlier, frustrated to only get a 1-1 draw out of that game with Leicester having dominated. But they bounced back in style last weekend, winning 4-0 against a hapless Everton. It's hard to know how much to read into that result, really. Was it Everton being dreadful or Spurs being ruthless? Probably a little bit of a combination of both. And I think Ange Postecoglou will have just been pleased to see his attacking players up and running, particularly Heung-min Son had a fantastic game against Everton. We know how devastating he can be when he hits top gear. Their last 2 trips to Newcastle, though, have been absolutely disastrous. 4-0 and 6-1 defeats at St James's Park in the last 2 seasons for Tottenham. And on both occasions, Alexander Isak, one of my favourite players, has run absolute riot. He's had braces in both of those games, and he's taken 10 shots across those 2 meetings, which suggests to me that the high line that Ange Postecoglou likes to play is just a disastrous approach against this Newcastle side when you're playing at Newcastle's home ground. Still, I don't think Postecoglou is the type to budge too much from his philosophy. He may tweak a few things here and there. I think the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I think Postecoglou is a smarter man than that, so I do think he will adjust things slightly, but he does kind of go out on his shield with this high line, and adding Anthony Gordon, who is devastating on the break and has shown in both of those aforementioned games, particularly last season. I think there's a recipe for more Newcastle goals here and more Alexander Isak related chaos. So he's yet to score this season, but as I say, he loves this fixture, and I was really surprised given he scored twice last season, twice the season before in this game. Just over 1.5 shots on target is 13-8. So no reason to think he won't go very close to making that land again at a juicy odds against. And just for the sake of it as well, over 2.5 shots on target for Isak is 11-2. That's a big bet. So I think Isak should be featuring in all your bet builders for this particular game, however you see it ending up. And over 1.5 shots on target, 13-8 will be my main bet there. Brad, your last game is Chelsea, fresh off the back of a surprising 6-2 win over Wolves, as we mentioned, and they take on Crystal Palace at Stamford Bridge. What do you think for this one?
Yeah, I backed Chelsea to get beat by Wolves last weekend, so it's nice of them to respond with 6 goals at Molineux. But as touched upon, that was slightly misleading given Wolves having the higher expected goals tally. But nevertheless, got to give him credit where credit's due. It was a positive result for Enzo Maresca, wasn't it, who now has his first Premier League win in charge there. They look set to progress in the Conference League too. They do continue to sign every man and his dog. I think they've signed another goalkeeper early this week, and they're also linked with Ivan Toney. But now Maresca will now be searching for his first home Premier League win against an out-of-form Crystal Palace side. They've lost both of their 2 league matches so far, 2-1 away at Brentford, then 2-0 at home to West Ham, as touched upon. It's a shame they have been torn apart by teams coming in for their players. Michael Elise, Jordan Ayew and Jurgen Anderson have already gone. Mark Gay could be set to follow. And as well, that leaves their relatively new manager, Oliver Glasner, in a difficult spot after making great strides last season. It also makes this a very difficult game to predict. At the start of the season, I'd have backed Palace pretty comfortably. But circumstances have changed there. Chelsea surprised me last week, but as I say, the scoreline was misleading. It was anyone's game at halftime at Molineux, and they kind of ran away with it in the second half. I wouldn't be at all surprised if Palace were to get something here still. Chelsea, they've got quality, but that chaotic setup with all the players, I think there's possibility for some real strange results there throughout this season. But I have learned from last week, so I'm not going to bet against them. It is a no bet from me here, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Palace did leave Stamford Bridge with a result this weekend.
Yeah, I like that. No bet, sometimes the best bet, as I do like to say. And no good trying to predict Chelsea at the moment. I totally agree. Very strange team to watch, follow, and try to bet on, I'm sure. The last game of the weekend is undoubtedly the blockbuster of the weekend. I've took Brad off this one with his Liverpool connections. I'm going to take this one, Manchester United versus Liverpool. I think we can still fairly say English football's two biggest clubs doing battle once again at Old Trafford. United, as I mentioned earlier, a little bit unconvincing in their opening two games, but there have been some green shoots, I think. They've played pretty well in patches, but that's probably the theme, I'd say, inconsistent. And that's been the theme under Erik ten Hag generally since he joined the club, I would say. But they've still ended up with a win over Fulham and a late defeat to Brighton, which could have easily swung the other way. They had a disallowed goal for offside late on, which could have, tilted it in their favour. So they're not miles away, but I have still got quite big reservations under United and Ten Hag. So Liverpool, meanwhile, they've made a really smooth start to life under Arne Slot, haven't they? It's been a good, smooth transition so far, I think, after following Jurgen Klopp, which is big shoes to fill, as we know, but he's done it well. He's doing it in his own style, I think, not trying to emulate Klopp. There's been I suppose a slight tweak in the approach of play, I think, and a little bit more possession-based, maybe not as heavy metal football that we associate with Klopp, but Slot is his own man, and I think the Liverpool fans have thrown their weight behind him. Nice banner unfurled, we've got your back, Arnie, so this is a big test for him. It's fair to say that this will be their biggest test today, I think, taking on Ipswich and Brentford and then going to Old Trafford. It's a big step up, but all the indications are that they'll give a good account of themselves. Of course, there's not been a lot of personnel turnover at Anfield this summer, so it's very familiar, this team. A lot of them have got experience of these kind of games, and that should stand them in good stead there. Liverpool are odds-on favourites to win at Old Trafford, and I wouldn't be entertaining that just purely because I don't think we've seen enough of Arne Slot's teams in these kind of big matches yet to know how they're going to handle it. And if there are any kind of slight tweaks or slight uncertainties in the new style of play, they may be exposed in this kind of fixture where there could be a raucous atmosphere. Remember the FA Cup game between these two sides last year where I think the crowd, sorry, Brad, the crowd did play a factor in that one, and it was a dramatic game where tactics can go a little bit out the window a little bit, and it just becomes a bit hell for leather at times. So interested to see how it pans out. I won't be trying to to back the match market at all here. I don't want to back United. I've got no confidence in backing them, even at the price near 3-1 at home, which I'm sure will appeal to some. I'm going down the player props line for this one, and it's a nice angle in, I think, this. Virgil van Dijk, the Liverpool captain, remarkably averages less than a foul a game in the Premier League over the last two seasons, which is unbelievable for a centre-half when you think about how many times he's exposed one-on-one against quick strikers, and he manages not to commit fouls. But in the last four Premier League meetings between Liverpool and Manchester United, Van Dijk has committed at least one foul, and on a couple of occasions he's committed two fouls. So fair to say that this occasion maybe gets him pumped up. Maybe he doesn't mind leaving a little mark on somebody early on or committing the foul when he needs to. So he's a savvy big game player, Van Dijk. And I was pretty surprised actually when I looked at the odds on him to commit a foul in this match, over 0.5 fouls. You can get quotes of odds against 11-10 with Betfair. Now, the last four times they've met in the Premier League, that's landed. So why not back it again? And again, one for your bet builders, I think. So Van Dijk to commit over 0.5 fouls is my play into the big game at odds against 11-10. We've managed to do it. We've got through the games in under half an hour. I'm going to round off the video by bringing our best bets onto the screen now. So as you can see, Brighton to score in the first half 2-1. Brian and Bemo anytime at 19-10. And with Villa to beat Leicester and to have over 15.5 shots. Isak is my selection in the Newcastle Tottenham game, having run riot against them in the last two meetings. And then Van Dijk to commit over 0.5 fouls in the big one. And Brad, I'll just run through yours if you want for easiness. Brad's gone for Nottingham Forest to win at 11-10. He's got Ivan Nielsen, Bournemouth new striker, to have over 1.5 shots on target against hapless Everton. Andreas Pereira to score or assist any time for Fulham against Ipswich, and Man City to continue their fine start to the season by scoring over 2.5 goals against West Ham at an odds against quote of 6-5. Well, Brad, thanks very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed our Premier League betting show this week. If you do, please give us a thumbs up and please consider subscribing to OddsNow. It's free. It will take you 2 seconds and you'll basically just get a notification every time we post. Let us know in the comments what you're backing in this week's Premier League slate, and hopefully we'll see you again very soon. Thanks for watching OddsNow, and stay tuned for the latest betting news and previews.